Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I want to revisit the Crone. And this video is primarily inspired by a video that Lennan Smith made over on her channel, so I'll have that linked as well as her channel down below. I highly recommend watching her video on the Crone and hearing her thoughts and what she has to say, especially because a lot of what I'm saying is inspired by and somewhat based off of the insights that she provided within her video. And her channel is really great. She has amazing content and she's very knowledgeable, so I highly recommend subscribing to her if you aren't already. But without further ado, I'm going to get into my ideas on the Crone and what that video, I guess, inspired me to start thinking about. I think my perspective is a little bit different. Lennan spoke to the fact that she has a triple goddess practice or something to that effect, wherein there's the idea, of course, of the maiden, mother, and crone, which I think many of us are familiar with, at least that idea in conception we're familiar with. And I don't have a practice like that. I think I don't identify as a woman, so my experience and take on the crone is going to be very different from somebody who is a woman. And so that in and of itself is going to change how I think about the crone, of course. And I guess my practice also influences the way that I look at the idea of the crone. I work with the Sheila Nagig over here, and I have my altar for her. And to me, she does actually represent more so the crone. I'll get into that in just a second. But I have a few videos about the Sheila Nagig in my work with her, as well as a tour of this altar. So I'll try to link those videos either below or in the cards or both, something like that. But I guess I'll start here because this is really my first-hand experiential working with the idea of a crone, and the first time I felt like I was confronted with it very, very overtly. It was right in my face, and I was actively working with the idea of the crone. So the Sheila Nagig is an Irish deity symbol figure, and the origins of her are quite nebulous. But for me, in my experience and with my readings and my work, she represents in many ways the triple goddess aspect, in that at times she feels much more like the maiden or the mother, but I would say that by and large she feels like she represents the crone aspect a lot more, and I work very closely with her. Yesterday was the new moon, which is when I do most of my work, or it's like a big night for me with the Sheila Nagig, and I feel like that's also tied in with the idea of the crone, the new moon, this darkness and turning inward. Lennan spoke to the ideas of the crone as an intuitive, somebody who has progressed to a certain point in their life where they can reflect and turn inward and have that dialogue and have these findings that they couldn't in their younger years because of the stages of life. And I think that she was really onto something with that. I tend to agree as well. And that's why I connect the new moon to the crone. Now, she spoke to the idea of the crone as a sort of yin to a yang of a sort, or the feminine side to a masculine side, wherein the sage would be the more masculine or male figure centered in a similar category. So they are kind of counterparts in a duality of masculine and feminine, yin and yang. And the crone being a bit more intuitive and internal, and the sage, she put it, is being more external and knowledgeable in terms of the outer world. And for me, that reminded me of the ideas of being esoteric or exoteric. It made me think of the high priestess in regards to the hierophant, or somewhat the hermit, I guess, if we're speaking to the sage and the crone. They are more advanced in their life, they're older, they're more mature. And so we would look to maybe the idea of the hermit and his sort of pilgrimage through life, and then the idea of the hierophant as being a bit more exoteric, looking to books and the world around him for knowledge and gaining experience in that way, so that when he reaches a certain age, he's able to impart that knowledge, he's able to fully understand it as opposed to just practicing and learning. He becomes the teacher, he has a level of mastery, and then we have, of course, the crone, who has accumulated internal intuitive knowledge through practice and through learning, and then she can impart her knowledge and be more active and engaged in what it means to be intuitive and internal and reflective. And of course, I mean, Lennan spoke to this as well, that we have both within us. Just because I am a man doesn't mean that I embody the sage any more than I do the idea of the crone. We have these sorts of archetypes within ourselves, and I think thinking of the crone as an archetype is highly beneficial, at least for discussion purposes. So we have, of course, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, but it seems like the crone is sort of relegated to the back. It's the one that we see least represented in everyday life. I think it has to do with the fear of death, the fear of aging, and all that surrounds that. Lennan spoke a bit to this as well. I think that the idea of the maiden is almost the one that we aspire to, the one that we put up on a pedestal. And I think that it's all actually quite mother-centric in a way. So the mother in the middle, it feels like everything is referenced in relation to what the mother is. So the maiden is waiting to become a mother. She's preparing for her role as a mother. She is supposed to be the young one who is to, in certain mythologies and a lot of mythologies where we see the maiden, she's basically just waiting to be married, to have a child, to start that chapter in her life. And her primary role as a woman is to be this mother of a sort. So the maiden is this young, youthful, naive, bright stage in life that we reference in terms of motherhood, because it seems as though it just we almost think of her as being in a waiting room, and that the fulfillment of her destiny or her role is to come. And then we take the crone, and it's referenced in terms of motherhood as well. So she has finished her role as mother. She's no longer in an age or stage in life where motherhood as a concept, not necessarily literal motherhood, but motherhood is not what we would assign to her, and it's not something that she is as likely to embody. So she's almost biding her time after being a mother until death. And I think that's in a lot of myths, that's kind of what they're getting at in between the lines, that the maiden is waiting to become the mother and the crone is waiting to die after having been the mother. And I think that that's a shame. I think it really just means it limits and it simplifies and reduces what it means to be a woman through these three stages. And I think that having one emphasized the most and the other two almost being ancillary stages of life is unfortunate. And I think that there's a lot of beauty on either side. And of course, speaking more to the crone here, but I think the idea of the crone being so knowledgeable and being able to impart this wisdom, and that it's not necessarily a definitive role that one embodies. I think even when we are more mature in later stages of life, that it doesn't mean that you've lost the mother stage or archetype within you. It doesn't mean that that's not a part of your life and you can't embody it. I think thinking that age and life experience and where one's at in terms of years, connecting that to where they ought to be in terms of the maiden, mother, and crone is limiting and a bit almost naive to think that somebody who maybe is in their later stages in life must be situated finally within the idea of the crone, and that she is no longer attuned to or accessing the mother and the maiden archetypes that she has clearly already experienced. If anything, she has not more to offer, but she has gone through those stages in their entirety and continued to embody them into her later years of life. So she might have more to offer on those than somebody who is currently experiencing the technical stages that we think of, I guess, when we think of the maiden and the mother. So the crone has all of it under her belt. She's integrated what it means to be the maiden, to be the mother. And it's not to say that she isn't those things now and that she can't be those things, but she has ample experience, and that experience, of course, is part of what makes the crone the crone. The idea that she has so much insight into things through experience, through living their internal mysteries. She's very much one to learn through doing, as opposed to when we look at the counterpart, the sage, he learns in theory. It feels like a lot more book learning, the outer world, observational, and so that, to me, that feels a lot more, it feels more, yeah, observational. Of course, it's exoteric, so he doesn't necessarily need to get his hands dirty or to apply what he's learned to action and in the real world. We would hope he would, but that's not necessarily something that feels very tied in with the idea of the sage. He may even sequester himself for years on end to learn and to write and to read without ever experiencing what it is that he's learning about, whereas the crone, while not as associated with the ideas of observation and book knowledge and theory, she's much more, I feel, connected to practice, learning through experience. And so it's of course a given that we embody both of these during our lives, and that maybe one will have a dominance within us, one will take the front seat a little bit more depending on your preference and style of living life and learning. But I think it's important to understand that we all have a crone within us. I, as a 20-some-odd-year-old man, have the crone within me and can work with the crone. Clearly, I do work with the crone, and I feel called to learn from what the crone has to offer. In that, for example, life tends to denounce her and ostracize her and put her down and make her out to be something that is undesirable in some ways for one reason or another. The idea of youth being the ideal is interesting. I think we spend a lot of time talking about and obsessing over things that are of minimal importance and that separate us rather than unite us. We have aging, which is something we will all do. We all age every day over the course of years, yet we shy away from conversation about that, and I think it's something that can unite us. I think it's something we all have in common, and we decide to be fearful of it, and also to not see beauty in it where beauty could be found. Of course, I understand fears of death, and that might inhibit conversation of anything that would lead toward it, but while I understand the fear of death, I don't understand the fear of speaking about it or shying away from speaking about it. It's something that we will all have happen to us at some point. We are going to reach the end stage of our life, and of course there's the argument or the perception that we undergo many deaths within our life when we transform or when we enter new chapters, when we leave things behind. In a way, we are going through stages that might be considered deaths of a sort. But I think to understand death more and to feel more comfortable speaking about it is to have a common ground with others that you might not be able to find common ground with. And I think the crone knows more of death and speaks to somebody who is in a liminal space on the precipice of death more so than the other stages of the maiden and the mother. And of course, fear of death and fear of being around something that is near the idea of death is in one way or not natural, I suppose, but I also think our society has extrapolated the fear and capitalized on it to make a profit, to create social norms and ideals, and to have us function in a way that is controllable, in a way that they can manipulate and exploit. They like the idea, I say they, I mean these sorts of corporations and self-perpetuating systems really enjoy our fear of death and marketing to us in terms of products that will preserve our youth, or distracting things that we want to invest in, that we want to give ourselves over to, instead of actually reflecting and maybe taking the time to confront some of those deeper fears that the crone can very well help us with, that the crone is embodied by. And so the crone doesn't sell. From a capitalistic marketing perspective, the crone doesn't sell. She plays into our fears, and there's not, if the crone were to be a product or were to be an individual that we could see as a finite being, she wouldn't want us to buy anything. She'd want us to maybe start to let go, to take time with what we have. The maiden and the mother, there's a lot that we can market to, there's a lot that we can sell within those archetypes that people will buy into. And I think the fear and what the crone embodies, one is it's easy to exploit in a society, and I think we are becoming, we as a whole in this world, the capitalist, I guess, agenda. I don't mean this to sound very conspiracy theory-esque, but I can't help but feel that the economy and the way that society is trending or has been trending over the last maybe 150, 200 years loves the idea of exploiting the fear associated with the crone for profit and for manipulative purposes that feed into ends and means that aren't actually beneficial for the whole. They aren't beneficial for any of us on an individual level in terms of intrinsic value and understanding. I think that the crone is where we would start to see and get to know ourselves a lot more intimately and deeply. And when we don't allow ourselves to truly reach that stage or to interact with it, there's a layer and an aspect of ourselves that we will never come to know. And I think that's what plays into some confusion in life in terms of finding purpose, feeling fulfilled, accepting some universal truths, and maybe investigating more spiritual ways of existing that aren't reliant upon structures and items and material goods. And so just because we're old doesn't mean that we are in touch with our crone. I think there are many mature people I've encountered that are deathly afraid of death and their aging process, that do what they can to hide and mitigate and try to grasp at straws of youth. And it's sad to see, and I don't think it's their fault per se. I think there's a lot of surrounding media and influence that tries to keep us from getting in touch with the crone archetype and the crone that is within us. And so you have these mature people who are actually very much in the technical stage of the crone, who are nearing that period of depth, who are slowing down and have the time to reflect and impart knowledge, and they are very much hesitant and wary of at all taking on any of those qualities and reflecting at all, because they fear the death, they fear what comes with what the crone embodies, and they remain confused. And it's a sad way to reach, I think, the end stages of life, being confused and never having taken the time to reflect and internalize and embrace what beauty there is in the aging process, and what beauty there is in having to slow down and reflect and to sift through all of your experience and turn it into wisdom. Knowledge is one thing. Knowledge is something that we are accumulating every day through books, through, of course, again, our experience. Wisdom, I think, is when we truly understand what the knowledge represents. We take it to a level that is more conceptual through critical thinking and feeling, and suddenly it opens a world of wonders. And wisdom doesn't just come with age. Wisdom comes with more than just technical age and literal age. I think it takes time and experience and willingness to sit and understand and reflect, and to allow certain chapters or archetypes like the crone to take over and to bring them to the forefront in order to process and integrate the knowledge that we've accumulated. And with the Shiwa Nagig, for example, she is a symbol that creates a lot of controversy for her image. Her very literal physical appearance is controversial, and we don't necessarily have origins of her, because in many stages of, for Irish history, she was defaced off of churches and meant to be hidden away because she was seen as undesirable or not in alignment with Christian values, Roman Catholic values that were present in Ireland. And so we then get a sort of watered down version of what the Shiwa Nagig is, and we have to pick for little gems that haven't been destroyed. And it's just, it speaks to the idea of conflating and exploiting the maiden and the mother. And if you look, for example, at Irish history, when it was kind of overrun with Christianity by force, a lot of what was seen as being open and older and more bold in terms of these feminine archetypes was shunned and put away. They were inaccessible, and they were thought to be wrong or bad, because I think that what the Shiwa Nagig embodies is boldness, is freedom in what it means to, for example, be a crone, to be okay with one's body, and you know what I mean? I think when people start to think for themselves and understand and allow these feelings to take root within themselves, they're a lot harder to control. They're a lot harder to influence and manipulate. And so as far as hierarchies go and power structures go, the crone is a threat. And I think that's why we would all benefit from experience with the crone, from taking the time to get in touch with our crone and to work with the crone. I think that we come into a power when we start to understand rather than fear, when we start to get to know the unknown that we previously felt uncomfortable with just the idea of it existing, and then we are able to proceed in a way that is a lot more sovereign and independent and powerful, and in a way that is appreciative of life, that sees someone who sees things through a different lens. So there's a lot of beauty and power, I think, in what the crone represents. I think that the sage archetype is one that's very interesting as well. My first, I guess, thoughts in regard to that are to tarot, and then I see the Hierophant, but then I think maybe the Hermit is a little bit more fitting, in that the Hermit is usually depicted as somebody who's in the mature stages of their life, whereas the Hierophant feels more fatherly in a way, fatherly and like a teacher. I guess it's maybe a mix, but to think of the sage as a counterpart is very interesting as well. I think that we are very accepting of what the sage represents, much more so than the idea of the crone. And that, I think, has to do with how men's status in society and misogyny and oppression of women. I think that plays a role in how we will put what the sage is on a pedestal and shun the crone. That a wise old man and the idea of a man aging is not nearly as taboo or almost, I guess, ugly. It's not as ugly as the idea of the woman's aging process. We glorify and sort of are very accepting of the men's or a male's aging process, and we are scared and shy away from and turn a blind eye to the woman's aging process, and it's not seen as something that is rich and lovely and beautiful and powerful, whereas the men's aging process is very much glorified in that we see it as a gaining of experience of this patriarch of a family or an organization or a structure, and that he has so much to offer and knowledge that he can pass on. And where the crone is concerned, we almost want to ignore her in some ways, and I don't think she's given the proper credit, and that's really interesting as well. So I do think that the crone has a power that we all need to tap into, and I think it's interesting to juxtapose the sage and the crone and to understand the differences and to maybe look at examples in society. I'm always looking for where these archetypes are embodied through characters in books or when I'm watching a TV show, and I have these thoughts going around in my head, and I can say, you know what, she is really much, she is embodying the crone very much in this scene, or this character and their role is very much the crone within this TV show or within this narrative. And so I look to examples like that for a better understanding. Of course, I try to have a better understanding through my experiential knowledge as well. But thank you so much, Lennan, for starting this discussion. It got me thinking about the crone, and it was something I really took with me, especially in my new moon practice yesterday. I've always thought of the Shiwana gig, and I work with her in a way where she is very much the crone, or the archetype of the crone could be seen in connection to her, but I guess I hadn't thought of it so consciously until I started to reflect. So let me all know what you think about the crone and where you see the crone in life, how you work with this archetype, and how you, I guess, feel it relates to you. I'd be very curious to know if you feel very drawn and connected to the idea of the crone, if it's one that feels a bit foreign to you, and for what reasons. So let me know. I'm just happy to have participated in this dialogue. I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was something that you found interesting and fun. And until next time, bye.